Chapter 23 of Darnley by G.P.R. James. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 23. A spirit fit to start into an empire, and look the world to law, he, full of fraudful arts, this well-invented tale for truth imparts. Dryden. We must now for a while change our place of action, and endeavour to carry the mind of the reader from the sweeter and more tranquil scenes of Richmond Park, one of the most favoured residences of Henry VIII, to York Place, the magnificent dwelling of that pampered child of fortune, Cardinal Wolsey. His progress, his power, and his fall, his arrogance, his splendour, and his vices, all the many changes that may be traced to his government of the realm, or to his artifices with the king, and of which to this day we feel the influence, changes which, though beneficial in their effects, like many of our most excellent institutions, originated in petty passions or egregious errors. In short, all his vast faults and his vast powers have so often called the eyes of the world to the proud prelate, that he seems hardly one of those remote beings which the cloud of past centuries has shadowed with misty indistinctness. His image, as well as his industry, is familiar to the mind's eye. He lives, he moves before us, starting out from the picture of the times of old to claim acquaintance with our memory as something more tangibly real than the vague, undefined forms that float upon the sea of history. Such skilful pens also have depicted him in every scene and situation, that it becomes almost unnecessary, and perhaps somewhat presumptuous, to say more concerning him than that which strictly interweaves itself with the web of this tale. York Place, which, as everyone knows, was afterwards called Whitehall, though it offered an appearance very different from the building at present known by that name, stood nearly on the same spot which it now occupies, surrounded by splendid gardens and ornamented with all that the arts of the day could produce of luxurious or elegant. So far from yielding in any degree to the various residencies of the king, it surpassed them all in almost every respect. The combination also of ecclesiastical pomp with the magnificence of a lay prince created in the courts and round the gates of the palace a continual scene of glitter and brilliancy. Whether it were deputations from abbeys and monasteries, the visits of other bishops, the attendance of noblemen and gentlemen come to pay their court, the halt of military leaders with their armed bands, prepared for service and waiting for command, still bustle, activity, and splendour were always to be met with in the open space before the building on every morning when the fineness of the weather permitted such display. There were to be seen passing to and fro the rich embroidered robes of the clergy, in all the hues of green and purple and of gold, the splendid liveries of the cardinal's own attendants and of the followers of his visitors, the white dresses of the soldiery, traversed with the broad red cross of England, the arms of the leaders and the many-coloured housings of the horses, while above the crowd was often displayed a high-wrought silver cross, or the glittering crook of bishop or mitred abbot, borne amongst banners and pennons and fluttering plumes. It was on a morning when the scene before the palace was full of more than usual life, owing to the arrival of the cardinal the night before from York, which was, be it remarked, one day earlier than he had been expected, that Sir Payne Rainsford rode through the crowd to the grand entrance. He was followed by 10 armed attendants, the foremost of whom were Cornishmen of that egregious stature which acquired for their countrymen in the olden time the reputation of sprouting out into giants. These two Sir Payne had sent for expressly from his estates in Cornwall, not without a purpose, and now, having dressed them in splendid liveries, he gave orders for his train to halt at such a distance as to be plainly visible from the windows of the palace. Dismounting from the horse at the door, he gave him to his page, and entering the hall, passed through the crowd of attendants with which it was tenanted, and mounted the grand staircase with that sort of slow, determined step which is almost always to be found in persons whose reliance on their own powers of mind is founded in long experience and success. The number of people whom he met running up and down the wide staircase with various papers in their hands announced at once the multitude of affairs which the cardinal was obliged to dispatch after his long absence at York, and foreshadowed some difficulty in obtaining an audience. Here was a sandalled monk slowly descending from what seemed some disappointed suit, there a light courtier hurrying forward in fear of being too late. Now the glad look of a satisfied applicant, now the vexed mien of one whose expectations were delayed, while, ever between, the familiar servants of the place glided to and fro on their various errands, passing coldly amongst that crowd of throbbing bosoms as beings apart, whose feelings had no community with the hopes, the fears, the wishes, and all the thronged emotions which were then excited or destroyed. Following one of these into the waiting hall at the top of the staircase, Sir Payne found it crowded almost to suffocation, with persons staying for an audience either from Wolsey himself or from one of his secretaries. Above their heads appeared a misty atmosphere of condensed human breath, and all around was heard the busy buzz of many voices murmuring in eager but whispered consultation. The hall was a large chamber cutting directly through the centre of the house, with a high Gothic window at each end, to the right and left of which, at both extremities, appeared a door. The one opposite to that by which Sir Payne entered stood open, though a small wooden bar prevented the entrance of the crowd into the room beyond, which was occupied by 6 or 7 ordinary clerks, busily employed in filling up various papers and speaking from time to time to the persons who presented themselves on business. At each of the doors, at the other end of the room, stood an usher with his rod and a marshal with his staff, opposing the ingress of any but such as the highest rank or personal interest entitled to enter beyond the porch of the temple, for there the right-hand path led to the privy chambers of Wolsey himself, and to the left to the offices of his principal secretaries. It was round this left-hand door that the crowd took its densest aspect, for many, who were hopeless of obtaining a hearing from the cardinal himself, fondly flattered themselves that their plaint or petition might reach his ear through his secretary, if, either by bribe or flattery, they could secure an interest of the secondary great man. Winding in and out through the meandering path left by the various groups in the hall, Sir Payne approached the door which led to the cardinal's apartments, and demanded admission. There was something in his tone which implied right, and the usher said if he would give his name he would inquire, though an applicant who had remained long unlistened to audibly murmured his indignation and claimed to be admitted first. Sir Payne cast upon him a cold look, mingled of pity and contempt, and passed through the door, which the usher now held open for his entrance. The room at which he arrived was a large ante-room occupied by various groups of lords and gentlemen attached to the household of the cardinal, who, prouder than royalty ever needs to be, would at least be equal with the king himself in the rank of his various officers. These were scattered about in various parts of the room, talking with the select visitors whom the ushers had permitted to enter, or staring vacantly at the figures on the rich tapestry by which they were surrounded, wherein, though scrutinized 1,000 times, they still found sufficient to occupy their idle eyes while waiting till the minister should go forth. With almost every one he saw, Sir Payne was in some degree acquainted, but in their bow or gratulation as he passed there was none of the frank cordial welcome of regard or esteem. It was simply the acknowledgment of a rich, powerful man, whose only title to reverence was in his influence and his wealth. And in the centre stood Lord Derby, and to him Sir Payan approached with a "Good morrow, my good lord." "Sir," said the Earl, looking him steadfastly in the face for a moment. Then, turning on his heel, he walked to the other end of the room. Nothing abashed, Sir Payan kept his ground, tracing the young lord with his eyes, in which no very amicable expression was visible. And then, after a moment, he approached a small table near the door of the minister's cabinet, whereat was seated a clerk, whom, as it so happened, Sir Payan himself had recommended to the cardinal. "Can his grace be spoken with, Master Taylor?" demanded the knight, as the clerk bowed low at his approach. "He is busied, honoured sir," replied the man, with a second profound reverence, "in conversation with the prior of his Abbey of St. Albans on matters of deep importance." A loud laugh from the chamber within reached Sir Payan's ear, through the door by which he stood, but he took no notice of this comment on the important business which Wolsey was transacting. And the clerk went on. "I am sorry to say, sir, also, that there are 5 or 6 persons of distinction who have waited on his grace's leisure for near an hour." "But the cardinal sent for me," said Sir Payan, "and besides—" and he whispered something to his former servant, which seemed convincing. In a minute or two after, the door opened, and the prior of St. Albans issued forth. Rustling up to the table in his rich silk robes, he said to the clerk in a low and important voice, "His grace commands you to send in the person of the highest rank that came next." "Well, holy father," said the clerk, rising, and then, appearing to search the room with his eyes, he waited till the prior was gone, when, turning to Sir Payan, he added in a loud voice, "Sir Payan Wileton, the Lord Cardinal is waiting for you." The knight instantly proceeded to the door, which was opened by one of the ushers who stood near, and passing on he found himself directly in the presence of the cardinal, who, seated in a chair of state, waited the next comer, with a countenance prepared to yield a good or bad reception according to his rank and purpose. He was, at that time, not apparently much above 55, tall, erect, and dignified, with a face replete with thought and mind, and a carriage at once haughty and graceful. His dark eye was piercing and full of fire, and lurking about the corners of his mouth might be seen the lines of unbounded pride, striven against and repressed, but still existing with undiminished force. The robes of bright scarlet satin, which he wore without any other relief than a tippet of rich sables, made his cheek look almost ashy pale, and the shade of the broad hat which covered his brow gave an air of pensive solemnity to his features, which, joined with the fire of his eye, the pride of his lip, and the knowledge of his power, invested his presence with an impressiveness not devoid of awe. As Sir Payan entered, Wolsey's brow gradually contracted into a frown, and fixing his glance full upon him, he let him stand for several moments before he motioned him to a seat. At length, however, he spoke. "Sir Payan Wileton," said he, "I have sent for you to speak on many subjects that may not be very agreeable for you to discuss. However, as they concern the welfare of society and the fame of the king's justice, they must be inquired into, nor must any man's rank or wealth shelter him from the even eye of equity." "Your grace hardly does me justice," replied Sir Payan, resolving to keep to vague professions till he had ascertained, as far as possible, what was passing in Wolsey's mind. "Had I been unwilling to discuss any part of my conduct with your grace, should I have importuned your gates every day for the last week in hopes of your return? And if, on the most minute investigation, I found any of my acts which would not meet the eye of equity itself, should I voluntarily present myself before the Cardinal of York?" "You were sent for, Sir Payan," replied Wolsey. "Last night the messenger set out." "By your grace's pardon," said the knight, If you but calculate, you will find that I could not have come from a far part of Kent in so short a space of time. It is true that I have received the packet, but that was only by sending last night to know if you had then returned. My servant met your messenger at the very door, and received the letter intended to be sent to Chilham. But every day, as I have told your grace, since I have risen from a bed of sickness where a cross accident had thrown me, I have not ceased to seek your presence on business of some import. Wolsey, long accustomed to encounter every species of wily art, was not to be led away by the exhibition of a new subject, and, pursuing his first object, he proceeded. We will speak of that anon. At present it is my task to inform you, sir, that various are the complaints, petitions, and accusations against you that daily reach my hand, and many prayers have been addressed to his royal grace the king by the very best and noblest of the land, to induce him to re-establish the house of Fitzbernard in the lordship and estates of Chilham Castle. All these things have led me to inquire, as indeed is but my duty as Chancellor of this kingdom, into the justice of your title to these estates, when I find that the case stands thus. The Earl of Fitzbernard, in the last year of his late Majesty's reign, was accused by those two infamous commissioners, Empson and Dudley, and was upon the premises condemned to the enormous fine of £100,000 under the penal statutes, and, as a still further punishment for some words lightly spoken, the king, then upon his deathbed, recalled the stewardship of Dover Castle, which involved, as was supposed, the forfeiture of Chilham Castle and its lands. Was it not so? It was so far, your grace, replied Sir Payan, but allow me to observe— Hush, said the cardinal, waving his hands. Hear me, and then your observations, if you please. Such being the case, as I have said, and the wide barony of Chilham supposed to be vacant, the stewardship of Dover Castle, with those estates annexed, is bestowed upon you. How or why is not very apparent, though the cause alleged is service rendered in the time of Perkin Warbeck. Now it appears from some documents placed in the hands of Lord Dacre of the North by the Duke of Buckingham that Chilham Castle was granted to Fulbert de Douvres at a period much subsequent to the grant of the stewardship of Dover, that it was totally distinct and held by tenure of chivalry, in fee and unalienable, except under attainder, or by breach of tenure. What say you now, Sir Payan? Why, simply this, your grace, replied Sir Payan boldly, that the good Duke of Buckingham, the noble Duke of Buckingham, as the commons call him, seems to be nearly as much my good friend as he is to the king, his royal master, or to your grace. And knitting his brow and clenching his teeth, he fixed his eyes upon the rose in the shoe, remaining sternly silent to let what he had said and what he had implied work fully on the mind of the cardinal. Wolsey's hatred to the princely Buckingham was well known, and Sir Payan easily understood that hatred to be the most maddening kind, called jealousy, so that not a word he had said but was meted to the taste and appetite of the cardinal with a skilful hand. The minister's cheek flushed while the knight spoke, and when, after implying by tone and look and manner that he could say no more, Sir Payan suddenly stopped and bent his eyes upon the ground, Wolsey had nearly burst forth in that impatient strain of question which would have betrayed the deep anxiety he felt to snatch at any accusation against his noble rival. Checking himself, however, the politic churchman paused and seemed to wait for some further reply, till, finding that Sir Payan still maintained his silent attitude of thought, he said, "Have you any reason, sir, to suppose that the Duke is ill-disposed towards his Grace the King? Of myself I speak not. His envy touches me not personally, but where danger shows itself towards our royal master, it becomes a duty to inquire. Your insinuations, Sir Payan, were strong. You should be strongly able to support them." "I know not, your grace," replied the knight, with the unhesitating daring that characterized all his actions, how far a man's loyalty should properly extend. But this I know, that I am not the tame and quiet dog that fawns upon the hand that snatches its mess from before its muzzle. What I know, I know. What I suspect remains to be proved, but neither knowledge nor suspicion, nor the clue to guide judgment through the labyrinth of wicked plotting, will I furnish to any one with the prospect before my eyes of being deprived, for no earthly fault, of my rightful property, granted to me by the free will of our noble King Henry VII. An ominous frown gathered upon Wolsey's brow, and fain would he have possessed the thunder to strike dead the bold man who dared thus to withhold the information that he sought, and oppose him with conditions in the plenitude of his power. "You are gifted with a strange hardihood, sir," cried he, in a voice the slight trembling of whose tone told the boiling of the soul within. "Did you ever hear of misprision of treason, say?" "I have, your grace," replied Sir Payan, whose bold and determined spirit was not made to quail even before that of Wolsey. Acting, however, coolly and shrewdly, he was moved by no heat, as was the cardinal, and though calculating exactly the strength of his position, he knew that it was far from his interest to create an enemy in the powerful minister, who, sooner or later, would find means to avenge himself. At the same time, he saw that he must make his undisturbed possession of Chilham Castle the price of any information he could give, or that he might both yield his secret and lose his land. "I have heard, your grace," he said, "of misprision of treason, but I know not how such a thing can affect me. First, treason must be proved. Then it must be shown that it was concealed, with full knowledge thereof. Doubts and suspicions, your grace knows, are not within the meaning of the law." Sir Payan paused, and Wolsey remained in silence, as if almost disdaining to reply. The knight clearly saw what was passing in his mind, and continued, after an affectation of thought, to give the appearance of a sudden return of affectionate submission to what he was about to say. "But why, your grace, why," cried he, "cast away from you one of your most faithful servants? Why must it be, when I have waited at your door day after day to give you some information, much for the state's and for your grace's benefit to know, that the very first time I am admitted to your presence I find my zeal checked and my affection cooled by an express intention to deprive me of my estates?" "Nay, Sir Payan," said Wolsey, glad of an opportunity of yielding without compromising either pride or dignity. "No such intention was expressed. You have mistaken entirely. I only urged these reasons that you might know what had been urged to me, and I was about to put it to you what I could do if the young Lord Darnley came over to this country and claimed these estates, for probably the old earl will not have energy enough to make the endeavour. What could I do, I say?" "Let him proceed by due course of law, my lord," replied Sir Payan, the calculation in whose mind was somewhat to the following effect, though passing more rapidly than it could when embodied in words. "Before his claim is made in law," thought he shall taste of the axe of the Tower, or I am mistaken. However, I will not let Wolsey know who he is, for then my interest in the business would be apparent, and I could claim no high recompense for ridding myself of my own enemy. No, I will crush him as Osborne Morris, a perfect stranger to me. Then will my zeal seem great. Pride will prevent him from owning his name till the death, and if he does own it, his coming here concealed, joined to the crimes that I will find means to prove against him, shall but make him appear the blacker." Such was the train of thought that passed instantly through his mind, while, with an affectation of candour, he replied, "Let him proceed by due course of law, my lord. Then, if he succeed, let him have it in God's name. All I ask is, that your grace will not moot the question, For one word by the great Wolsey throws more weight into one or other of the scales of justice than all the favour of a dozen kings. Wolsey was flattered, but not deceived. However, it was his part not to see, at least for the time, and though he very well understood that Sir Payan would take special means to prevent the young lord from seeking justice by law, he replied, "All that I could ever contemplate, Sir Payan, was to do equal right to any one that should bring his cause before me. It is not for me to seek out occasions for men to plunge themselves in law, and be you very sure that unless the matter be brought before me in the most regular manner, I shall never agitate the question, which is one that, even should it be discussed, would involve many, many difficulties. From what I say now, you may see, sir, that your haste has hurried you into unnecessary disrespect, which, heaven knows, I feel not as regards my person, but as it touches my office, I am bound to reprove you." "Most deeply do I deplore it," replied Sir Payan, "if I have been guilty of any disrespect to one whom I reverence more than any other on the earth. But I think that the information which I have to communicate will, at least, be some atonement. I have then, my lord," he proceeded, lowering his voice, "I have then discovered, by a most singular and happy chance, as dangerous a conspiracy as ever stained the annals of any European kingdom, and I hold in my hand the most irrefragable proofs thereof, together with the names of the principal persons, the testimony of several witnesses which bears upon the subject, and various letters which are in themselves conviction. I will now, with your grace's leave—" At that moment one of the ushers opened the door of the cabinet, and with a profound reverence informed Wolsey that the Earl of Knoll desired to know when he could have an audience, as he had been waiting long without. "Ha! What?" exclaimed the cardinal, his eye flashing, and his lip quivering with anger at the interruption. "Am I to be disturbed each moment? Tell him I cannot see him. I am busy. I am engaged, occupied on more important things. Were he a prince, I would not see him. And you, beware how you intrude again. Now, Sir Payan, speak on. This is matter of moment indeed. What was the object of this conspiracy?" "Nothing less I can conceive, my lord, than to make the commons dissatisfied with the government under which they live, to incite them to various insurrections, and, if possible, into general rebellion, under favour of which my Lord Duke of Buckingham might find his way to the throne. At least, there are fixed his eyes." "Ha! My proud Lord of Buckingham," said Wolsey, with a triumphant smile. "What! Hast thou wired thine own feet? But you say you have proof, Sir Payan. We must have full proof. But you are not a man to tread on unsteady ground. Your proofs are sure?" he reiterated, with a feverish sort of anxiety to ascertain that his rival was fully in his power. "In the first place, read that, my lord," said Sir Payan, putting in his hand one of a bundle of papers that he had brought with him. "That is the first step." "Why, what is this?" cried Wolsey. "This is but the deposition of Henry Wilson of Pencriton in the Duchy of Cornwall, who maketh oath and saith that the prisoner Osborne Maurice, alias Sir Osborne Maurice, is the man whom he saw at the head of the Cornish miners in insurrection on the 3rd of January last, and who incited them by cries and words to burn and destroy all that came in their way, till they should have satisfaction in everything that they required. But for the further acts of the said Osborne Maurice, he, the deponent, begs leave to refer to his former depositions, taken before Sir John Boreham, knight, of the city of Penzance in Cornwall. Only upon oath he declareth that the said Osborne Maurice, now present, is the ringleader or conductor of the mob mentioned in his former deposition, in witness whereof. Ha! said Wolsey thoughtfully. There is one, I find, of this same name, Sir Osborne Maurice, who, during my absence, has crept into the king's favour. Surely it may be the same. On my life, my lord, the very same, cried Sir Payan. 'Twas but the morning before last that, At the just at Richmond I saw him with our noble king, his chosen companion, with the Duke of Suffolk, to keep the barriers against all comers, and there he ruffled it, amongst the best, swimming, as 'twere, at the top of the wave." "Then we will lay this on his head," said Wolsey, placing his forefinger emphatically on the paper, "and that shall sink him. But how does this touch the Duke of Buckingham?" "Your Grace shall hear," replied Sir Payan. "This Wilson, who made the deposition you there hold, came to me one day in the last of March, you must know he is my bailiff, and told me a sad story of his woeful plight, how in a cottage hard by he had met the man whom he had seen burn down his father's house in Cornwall, and who was there employed in the same devilish attempt to instigate the peasants to revolt. Wilson, it seems, accused him, whereon, being a most powerful and atrocious traitor, he struck the bailiff to the ground, and left him for dead. This being sworn on oath before me as a magistrate, I sent forth and had the villain arrested, after a most desperate struggle. With the intention of sending him to Cornwall, I had him committed to the strong room of the manor, but somehow during the night he contrived to escape through a window, and made his way to the court." "But still, Sir Payan," interrupted the cardinal, "this does not implicate the Duke of Buckingham, who, as I have good reason to believe, is but a scant lover of our royal king, and towards myself bears most inveterate malice. I have heard many a rumour of his plots and schemes, but it is proof, Sir Payan, it is proof that we must have." "And proof your Grace shall have," replied the knight, counting the hatred that Wolsey bore towards the Duke as his own gain, and enjoying the inveteracy of his malice not only with the abstract satisfaction of fellow-feeling, but as a fisherman delights to see the voracious spring of the trout at the fly he casts before his snout. "Let your Grace listen to me, for my story, though somewhat long, is nevertheless conclusive. This Osborne Maurice, in his escape, left behind him the leathern horse-bags with which he rode when he was taken, and in my capacity as magistrate I made free to open them." You did right," cried Wolsey, almost forgetting his dignity in eagerness. "What did you find? Say, Sir Payan, what did you find?" "I found several letters from his Grace the Duke of Buckingham," answered Sir Payan, "being principally written to bring this Sir Osborne Maurice to the knowledge of persons about the court, recommending him as one that may be trusted." Your Grace will mark those words, "may be trusted." But amongst the rest was one which shows for what he may be trusted. Behold it here, my lord. You know the Duke's hand and style, and he presented the letter to Wolsey. The cardinal snatched it eagerly, but remembering himself, he turned more composedly to the address, and read, "Sir John Morton." "Ah," cried he, "so, an old Perkin Warbeckist, the last I believe alive. But for the contents, trusty and well-beloved friend. Everlasting friendship. Of course one traitor loves another, but let us see. How? The daring villain! To inform you that before another year arrive, my head shall be the highest in the realm, at least so promises Sir Osborne Maurice, whose promises, as you know, are not such as fail. Ha, Sir Payan, ha! Did you read it? This is treason, is it not? By my life, the Duke's own hand. But what says he further? Ha! The butcher's cur Wolsey has long wanted the lash, and he shall have it soon. See you how rank is his malice? We will read no farther. This condemns him, and as for Sir Osborne Maurice, to-night he shall have his lodging in the Tower." "Though other proof might be deemed superfluous," said Sir Payan, "yet, my lord, when I came to the part where he called your Grace a butcher's cur," and the knight dwelt somewhat maliciously on the words, "my zeal and affection for your Grace's service made me instantly resolve to track this Osborne Maurice on his journey, after escaping from prison. In person I could not do it, for a fall from my horse laid me in my bed for 3 weeks, but I took care that it should be done, and found that he returned straight to my Lord of Buckingham's. From thence he went to the Benedictine Abbey at Canterbury, where he seems to have been sent to escort a Lady Katrine Bulmer to the court. Then, passing by Rochester, he had an interview with the chief of the rioters at Hilham Green. Your Grace will be at no loss to know how, and by whom, that memorable tumult was instigated. Then he pretended to save a good, simple priest from the mob, but, by the clergyman's own account, they gave him up at a single word from this Morris, which shows what was his influence with them, for they were, the moment before, about to hang the man they yielded so quietly after. The priest is at my lodging here. This was the traitor's last adventure before arriving at the court, where, either by some sorcery or other damned invention, he has bewitched the better judgment of the king, so that none is so well loved as he. Perhaps he waits but an opportunity to put his dagger in our royal master. Heaven forbid, cried Wolsey. We will instantly set off for Richmond. Without there, let the barge be prepared directly. Sir Payan, you have saved the realm, and may claim a high reward. The reward I most affect, replied the knight, in a well-acted tone of moderation, is simply to remain in quiet possession of that which I have. Life is now wearing with me, your Grace, and I covet not greater charges than those which I enjoy. Let me but be sure of them. Rest tranquil on that point, replied Wolsey. I will look thereto. There are, indeed, continued Sir Payan, some hereditary estates which, though they should be mine, are held by another, and on that score I may claim your Grace's assistance before I endeavour to recover them. For I put my whole actions in your Grace's hands, that, like a mere machine, I may move but as you please. Which estates are these, Sir Payan? Demanded Wolsey, with something very nearly approaching to a smile, at the peculiar line of the knight's cupidity. If they be truly yours, doubt not, but you shall have them. They are those estates in Cornwall, replied the knight, lately held by my cousin, the Earl de Grey, which have since passed to Constance his daughter, though by all custom of succession according to their tenure, I hold them to pass directly in the male line. Nay, nay, Sir Payan, cried Wolsey with a curl of his lip, this is too much. Constance de Grey is my ward, and shall not lose her estates lightly. She is, indeed, added he, thoughtfully, and speaking to himself more than to the knight, though not a word was lost to his attentive ears, she is, indeed, somewhat wilful. That letter, in which she refuses to wed her cousin, though calm and humble, was full of rank obstinacy. The fear of losing her estates, however, but we shall see. Sir Payan, I must hold my opinions suspended till such time as you lay before me some proofs of the matter. And now tell me, think you, in this plot of Buckingham's, is there any other person of high rank implicated? Indeed, there must be, for he would never undertake such daring schemes without some sure abettors. Sir Payan, these lords are all too proud. We must find means to humble them. It may be as well to let this arch-traitor Buckingham proceed for some short time till we find who are his accomplices. But for this Sir Osborne Maurice, he shall to the Tower to-night, for therein is the king's life affected. Might it not be better, in your Grace's good judgment, said Sir Payan, to take the Duke's person at once? For assuredly, as soon as he hears that his minion is committed, he will become alarmed, and find security in some foreign land. He shall be so well watched, said Wolsey, closing his hand tightly, as if he grasped his enemy, that were he no larger than a meagre ermine, he should not escape me. No, we must let him condemn himself full surely. But, Sir Payan, are you prepared to accompany me to Richmond? If by chance this Maurice were to see me with your Grace, replied Sir Payan, he would lose no time but fly instantly before you had speech of his Grace the King. If you think it necessary, my lord, that I should attend you, it may be well to arrest the traitor immediately on your arrival. Nay, 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 said Wolsey, shaking his head. You know not Henry, Sir Payan. He is hard and difficult to rule, and were I to arrest Sir Osborne, would take for insult what was meant as a service. But you shall not go. There is indeed no need. These papers are quite enough, and the testimony of the priest. Let him be sent down post-haste to Richmond after me." "He shall, my lord," replied Sir Payan. "But one word more, your grace. If the Duke of Buckingham be condemned, his estates, of course, are forfeited to the crown. Near me lies his beautiful manor of the Hill in Kent, and I know your grace will not forget your faithful servants." Wolsey paused, and Sir Payan went on. "To show how constantly present your grace is to all my thoughts, you told me some time ago that you desired to have 2 of the tallest men in the realm for porters of the gate. Cast your eyes through that window, my lord, and I think you will see 2 that no prince in Europe can match in his hall." No service that Sir Payan could have rendered, either to the state or to himself, would have given half so much pleasure to Wolsey as the possession of the 2 gigantic Cornishmen we have before mentioned, for amongst all his weaknesses, his passion for having tall men about him was one of the most conspicuous. As soon as for a moment or two he had considered them attentively through the window, and compared them with the pygmy-looking race around, he thanked Sir Payan with infinite graciousness for his care, and hinted, though he did not promise, that Buckingham's manor in Kent might be the reward. While he yet spoke, a gentleman usher entered to announce that the barge was ready, and giving some more directions to Sir Payan in regard to sending the priest, Wolsey rose to proceed on his journey. The procession, without which he never moved, was already arranged in the antechamber, consisting of marshals and gentlemen ushers, with 2 stout priests bearing the immense silver crosses of the archbishopric and his legacy. And the moment he moved towards the door, the ushers pressed forward, crying, "On before, my lords and masters, on before! Make way for the Lord Cardinal, make way for my lord's grace, on before, on before!" Wolsey immediately followed, and proceeded to his barge, while Sir Payan returned to his own house in Westminster, and dispatched the priest to Richmond, after which he sat himself down to write. What he did write consisted of but a few lines, but they were of some import, and as soon as they were finished he entrusted them to one of his shrewdest and most assured servants, with many a long direction and many an injunction to speed. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of Darnley by G.P.R. James. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 24. This hour's the very crisis of your fate, your good or ill, your infamy or fame, and all the colour of your life depends on this important now. The Spanish Friar. If anyone will look at the almanac for the year 1520, he will find marked, opposite the 4th day of May, the following curious piece of information: "High water at London Bridge at 3:30." And if he calculate rightly, he will discover that as Wolsey set out from what was then called the Cardinal's Bridge at high noon, he had the most favourable tide in the world for carrying him to Richmond. His rowers, too, plied their oars with unceasing activity, and his splendid barge, with its carved and gilded sides, cut rapidly through the water, but still not rapidly enough for his impatience. Sitting under an awning, with a table before him, at which was placed a clerk, he sometimes read parts of the various papers that had been presented during the morning, and sometimes dictated to the secretary, but more frequently gave himself up to thought, suffering his mind to range in the wild chaos of political intrigue, which was to him like the labyrinth a man makes in his own garden, in which a stranger might lose his way, but where he himself walks for his ease and pleasure. Not that Wolsey's mind was one that soared above the pains of political life, for his were all the throbbing anxieties of precarious power, his was all the irritation of susceptible pride and insatiable vanity.
while jealous envy, avarice, and ambition at once made the world a desert and tormented him with unquenchable thirst. No surer road to Wolsey's hatred existed than the king's favour, and since his return to London, though but one evening had passed, yet often had his heart rankled at hearing from those who watched for him in his absence, that a young stranger, named Sir Osborne Maurice, had won the king's regard and become the sharer of all his pleasures. The information given him by Sir Payan Wileton had placed in his hand arms against this incipient rival, as he deemed him, which were sure to crush him, and, with a sort of pride in the conquest he anticipated, he muttered to himself, as he saw the narrowing banks of the river approaching towards Richmond, "Now, Sir Osborne Maurice, now." The boat touched the shore, and while the chief yeoman of the barge, as his privilege, supported the arm of the cardinal, the two stout priests bearing the crosses hurried to land with the other attendants, and ranged themselves in order to proceed before him. Two of his running footmen sped on to announce his approach, and the rest, with the form and slowness of a procession, traversed the small space that separated them from the court, reached the gate, and entering the palace, Wolsey, more like an equal prince than a subject, passed towards the king's privy chamber, amidst the profound bows and reverences of all the royal attendants, collected to do honour to his arrival. Many had been the rumours in the palace during the morning respecting the king's health, and it was generally reported that the accident of the day before had thrown him into a fever. This, however, was evidently not the case, for a little before noon Sir Osborne Maurice had received a message by one of the royal pages to the effect that at 3 o'clock the king would expect him in his privy chamber. That hour had nearly approached, and the young knight was preparing to obey Henry's commands, when a note was put into his hands by Mistress Margaret, the waiting woman of Lady Constance de Grey. It was a step which Sir Osborne well knew she would not have taken had it not been called for by some particular circumstance, and with some alarm he opened the paper and read: "The Lord Cardinal is here. Remember your promise. Tarry not rashly if you love Constance." As Wolsey had ever been a declared enemy to his father, and a steady supporter of Sir Payan Wileton, Sir Osborne felt that the prospect was certainly in some degree clouded by his arrival; and while at the court he had heard enough of the jealousy that the favourite entertained towards all who often approached the king, to make him uneasy with regard to the future. But yet he could not imagine that the regard of Henry could be easily taken from him, nor the service he had rendered immediately forgotten; and strong in the integrity of his own heart, he would not believe that any serious evil could befall him. Yet the warning of Sir Cesar still rung in his ears, and made an impression which he could not overcome. It would be very easy to represent our hero as free from every failing and weakness, even from those of the age he lived in; easy to make him as perfect as ever man was drawn, and more perfect than ever man was known. But then we should be writing a romance, and not a true history. Sir Osborne was not perfect, and living in an age whose weakness it was to believe implicitly in judicial astrology, he shared in that weakness, though but in a degree, and might, indeed, have shared still less had not the very man who seemed to take such an interest in his fate acquired in the court where he lived a general reputation for almost unerring perception of approaching events. No one that the young knight met, no one that he heard of, doubted for a moment that Sir Cesar possessed knowledge superhuman. To have doubted of the possibility of acquiring such knowledge would have been in those times a piece of scepticism fully equal in criminality to doubting the sacred truths of religion; and therefore we cannot be surprised that he felt a hesitation, an uneasiness, a sort of presentiment of evil, as he approached the privy chamber of the king. At the door of the antechamber, however, he found stationed a page, who respectfully informed him that the king was busy on affairs of state with the cardinal Lord Chancellor, and that his grace had bade him say that as soon as he was at leisure he would send for him to his presence. Sir Osborne returned to his own apartment, and after calling for Longpole, walked up and down the room for a moment or two, while some curious vague feelings of doubt and apprehension passed through his mind. "'Tis very foolish," he said at length, "and yet 'tis no harm to be prepared. Longpole, saddle the horses, and have my armour ready. 'Tis no harm to be prepared." And quitting his own chambers, he turned his steps towards those of Lady Constance, which here, not like the former ones in the palace at Greenwich, were situated at the other extremity of the building. His path led him again past the royal lodgings, and as he went by, Sir Osborne perceived that the page gave entrance to a priest, whose figure was in some degree familiar to his eye. Where he had seen him he did not know, but, however, he stayed not to inquire, and proceeded onward to the door of Lady Constance's apartments. One of her women gave him entrance, and he soon reached her sitting chamber, where he found her calmly engaged in embroidery. But there, also, was good Dr. Wilbraham, who of late had shrewdly begun to suspect a thing that was already more than suspected by half the court, namely, that Sir Osborne Maurice was deeply in love with Constance de Grey, and that the lady was in no degree insensible to his affection. Now, though the good doctor had thought in the first instance that Lady Constance's marriage with Lord Darby would be the very best scheme on earth, he now began to think that the present arrangement would be a great deal better. His reasoning proceeding in the very inverse of Wolsey's, and leading him to conclude that as Lord Darby had quite enough of his own, it would be much better for Lady Constance to repair, with her immense wealth, the broken fortunes of the ancient house of Fitzbernard, and at the same time secure her own happiness by marrying the best and the bravest of men. Notwithstanding all this, he could not at all comprehend, and never for a moment imagined, that either Constance or her lover might in the least wish his absence. And therefore, with great satisfaction at beholding their mutual love, he remained all the time that Sir Osborne dared to stay, and conducted him to the door with that affectionate respect which he always showed towards his former pupil. While the old clergyman stood bidding Sir Osborne farewell, a man habited like a yeoman approached, inquiring for the lodging of Lady Constance de Grey, and on being told that it was before him, he put a folded note into the hands of Dr. Wilbraham, begging him to deliver it to the lady, which the chaplain promised to do. And now, leaving the good clergyman to perform this promise, and Sir Osborne to return to his apartment, somewhat mortified at not having had an opportunity of conversing privately with Constance, even for a moment, we will steal quietly into the privy chamber of the king, and seating ourselves on a little stool in the corner, observe all that passes between him and his minister. "God save your royal grace," said Wolsey, as he entered, "and make your people happy in your long and prosperous reign." "Welcome back again, my good lord cardinal," replied the king. "You have been but a truant of late. We have in many things wanted your good counsel, but your careful letters have been received, and we have to thank you for the renewed quiet of the West Riding." "Happily, your grace, all is now tranquil," replied the cardinal, "and the kingdom within itself blessed with profound peace. But yet, my lord, even when this was accomplished, it was necessary to discover the cause and authors of the evil, that the fire of discord and sedition might be totally extinguished, and not, being only smothered, burst out anew where we least expected it. This has been done, my liege. The authors of these revolts, the instigators of their fellow subjects' treason, have been discovered, and if your grace have leisure for such sad business, I will even now crave leave to lay before you the particulars of a most daring plot, which, through the activity of good Sir Payan Wileton, I have been enabled to detect." "Without there!" cried the king, somewhat impatiently. "See that we are not interrupted. Tell Sir Osborne Maurice that we will send for him when we are free. Sit, my Wolsey," he continued, Now, by the holy faith, it grieves me to hear such things. I had hoped that, tranquillity being restored, I should have sped over to France to meet my royal brother Francis, with nothing but joy upon my brow. However, you are thanked, my good lord, for your zeal and for your diligence. We must not let the poisonous root of treason spread, lest it grow too great a tree to be hewn down. Who are these traitors, Have you good proof against them? Such proof, my liege, that, however willing I be to doubt, uncertainty, the refuge of hope, is denied me, and I must needs believe. When we have nourished anything with our grace, fostered it with kindly care, taught it to spread and become great, heaped it with favours, loaded it with bounty, we naturally hope that, having sowed all these good things, our crop will be rich in gratitude and love. But sorry I am to say that your grace's royal generosity has fallen upon a poisoned soil, and that Edward, Duke of Buckingham, who might well believe himself the most favoured man in the realm, now proves himself an arrant traitor." "By heaven!" cried the king, "I have lately much doubted of his loyalty. He has, as you once before made me observe, much absented himself from the court, keeping, as I hear, an almost royal state in the counties; and lately, on the pretence that he is sick, that his physicians command him quiet, he refuses to accompany us to Guisnes. I fear me, 'tis his loyalty is sick. But let me hear your reasons, my good lord cardinal. Fain would I still behold him with an eye of favour, for he is in many things a noble and a princely peer, and by nature richly endowed with all the shining qualities both of the body and the mind. 'Tis sad, indeed, 'tis sad, for such a man should fall away and lose his high renown. But your reasons, Wolsey, give me the history." It were needless in this place to recapitulate all that we have seen in the last chapter, advanced by Sir Payan Wileton to criminate the Duke of Buckingham. Suffice it that Wolsey related to the king the very probable tale that had been told him by the knight, namely, that Buckingham, aspiring to the throne, affected an undue degree of popularity with the commons, and by his secret agents rendered them dissatisfied with the existing government, exciting them to various tumults and revolts, of which he cited many an instance, and that, still further, he had contrived to introduce one of the most active agents of his treason into the court, and near to the king's own person. "Whom do you aim at?" cried the king. "Quick, give me his name. I know of no such person. All about me are men of trust." "Alas, no, my liege," answered Wolsey. "The man I mean calls himself Sir Osborne Maurice." "Ha!" cried Henry, starting; and then, after thinking for a moment, he burst into a fit of laughter. "Nay, nay, my good Wolsey," he said, shaking his head; "nay, nay, nay. Sir Osborne saved my life no longer ago than yesterday, which looks not like treason." And he related to the cardinal the accident that had befallen him while hawking. Wolsey was somewhat embarrassed, but he replied, "We often see that, taken by some sudden accident, men act not as they proposed to do; and there is such a nobility in your grace's nature that he must be a hardened traitor indeed, who could see you in danger, and not by mere impulse hasten to save you. Perhaps such may have been the case with this Sir Osborne, or perhaps his master's schemes may not yet be ripe for execution. At all events, my liege, doubt not that he is a most assured traitor." "I cannot believe it," cried Henry, striking the table with his hand. "I will not believe it. By heaven, the very soul of honour sparkles in his eye. But your proofs, lord cardinal, your proofs! I will have no such things advanced against my faithful subjects without full and sufficient evidence." The more eagerness that Henry showed in defending his young friend, the more obnoxious did Sir Osborne become to Wolsey; and he laid before the king, one by one, the deposition of Wilson, Sir Payan's bailiff, several letters which Buckingham had written in favour of the young knight, and lastly, the duke's letter to Sir Thomas Morton, where, either by a forgery of Sir Payan Wileton's, or by some strange chance, it appeared that Sir Osborne Maurice had promised that within a year the duke's head should be the highest in the realm. While he read, Henry's brow knit into a heavy frown, and biting his lip, he went back to the beginning, and again read over the papers. "Cardinal," said he at length, "bid the page seek Pace, my secretary, and ask him for the last letter from the Duke of Buckingham." Wolsey obeyed, and while waiting for the return of the page, Henry remained with his eyes averted, as if in deep thought, beating the papers with his fingers, and gnawing his lip in no very placable mood. When the cardinal wisely abstained from saying a word, leaving the irritation of the king's mind to expend itself, without calling it upon himself. As soon as the letter was brought, Henry laid it side by side with those that Wolsey had placed before him, and seemed to compare every word, every syllable, to ascertain the identity of the handwriting. "True, by my life!" cried he, casting down the papers. "The writing is the same. And now, my lord cardinal, what have you farther to say? Are there any farther proofs, ha?" "Were there none other, your grace," replied Wolsey, "than the duke's handwriting, and the deposition of a disinterested and respectable witness, who can have no enmity whatever against this Sir Osborne, and who probably never saw him but on the 2 occasions he mentions, I think it would be quite sufficient to warrant your grace in taking every measure of precaution. But there is another witness, whom, indeed, I have not seen, but who can give evidence, I understand, respecting the conduct of the person accused towards the Rochester rioters. Knowing how much your grace's wisdom passeth that of the best in the realm, I have dared to have this witness, a most honourable priest, brought hither, hoping that the exigency of the case might lead you to examine him yourself, when, perhaps, your royal judgment may elicit more from him than others could do." "You have done wisely, my good lord cardinal," replied Henry, whose first irritation had now subsided. "Let him be called, and bid your secretary take down his deposition, for 'tis not fitting that mine be so employed." At the command of Wolsey, one of the pages went instantly to seek the priest, who, by the care and dispatch of Sir Payan, had been sent down with all speed, and was now waiting with the cardinal's attendants in no small surprise and agitation, not being able to conceive why he was thus hurried from one place to another, and breathing also with some degree of alarm in the unwonted atmosphere of a court. On being ushered into the royal presence, the worthy man fell down upon both his knees before Henry, and clasping his hands, prayed for a blessing on his head with such fervour and simplicity that the monarch was both pleased and amused. "Rise, rise, good man," said the king, holding out his hand for him to kiss. "We would speak with you on a business of import. Nay, do not be alarmed. We know your worth, and purpose to reward you. Place yourself here, master secretary, and take down his replies. Sit, my good lord cardinal. We beg you to be seated." As soon as Wolsey had taken a low seat near the king, and the secretary, kneeling on one before the table, was prepared to write, Henry again proceeded, addressing the priest, who stood before him the picture of a disquieted spirit. "Say, do you know one Sir Osborne Maurice?" demanded the king. "Yes, surely, please your royal grace," replied the priest. "At least that was the name which his attendants gave to the noble and courageous knight that saved me from the hands of the Rochester shipwrights." "First," said Wolsey, "give us your name, and say how you came to fall into the hands of these rebellious shipwrights." "Alas, your grace," answered the priest, "I am a poor priest of Dartford, my name John Timeworthy; and hearing that these poor misguided men at Rochester were in open rebellion against the government, from lack of knowledge and spiritual teaching, I resolved to go down amongst them and preach to them peace and submission. I will not stay to say how and where I found them, but getting up upon a bench that stood hard by, under an apple tree, I gathered them round me like a flock of sheep, and began my discourse, saying, 'Woe, woe, woe, woe unto ye, shipwrights of Rochester, that you should arm yourselves against the king's grace. You are like children, that must fain eat hot pudding, and burn their mouths withal. For ye will cry, and ye will cry, till the sword fall upon you.'" And then, when Lord Thomas comes down with his men-at-arms, ye will turn about and fly, and the spears will stick in your hinder parts, and ye shall be put to shame, for though he have but hundreds, and ye have thousands, his are all men of the bow and of the spear, and ye know no more of either than a jackass does of the harp and psaltery. And thereupon, your grace, they that I took for strayed sheep showed themselves to be a pack of ravening wolves, for they haled me down from the bench, and beat me unmercifully, and putting a halter round my neck, led me along to hang me up, as they vowed, in sight of Rochester Castle, when, just as they were dragging me along, more dead than alive, across a little green, the knight, Sir Osborne Maurice, came up, and, as I said, rescued me. And for a surety he is a brave and generous knight, and well deserving your grace's favour." "By my faith, I have always thought so," said Henry. "What say you now, cardinal? Question him yourself, man." Wolsey eagerly snatched at the permission, for he plainly saw that the matter was not proceeding to his wish. "Pray, my good master Timeworthy," said he, "how was it that this Sir Osborne rescued you? Did he put his lance in rest and charge the whole multitude, and deliver you from their hands?" "Not so, not so," cried the priest. "He did far more wisely, for there would have been much blood spilt, but he sent forward one, who seemed to be his shield-bearer, who shook hands with the chief of the rioters, and spoke him fair, and then the knight came forward himself and spoke to him, and the chief of the rioters cried with a loud voice to his people that this was not Lord Thomas, as they had thought, but a friend and well-beloved of the good Duke of Buckingham, and it was wonderful how soon the eloquence of that young man worked upon the multitude, and made them let me go. He was, indeed, a youth of goodly presence, and fair to look upon, and had something noble and commanding in his aspect, and his words moved the rioters in the twinkling of an eye, and made them wholly change their purpose." Henry's brow, which had cleared during the former part of the priest's narration, now grew doubly dark and cloudy, and he muttered to himself, "Too clear, too clear," while Wolsey proceeded to question the priest more closely. "Indeed, your grace," replied he, in answer to the cardinal's minute questions, "I can tell you no more than I have told, for, as I said, I was more dead than alive all the time, till they gave me up to the knight, and did not hear half that passed." "And what did you remark after you were with the knight?" demanded Wolsey. "Was there no particular observation made on the whole transaction?" "Not that I can call to mind," answered the priest. "All I remember is, that they seemed a very merry party, and laughed and joked about it, which I, being frightened, thought almost wicked, God forgive me, for it was all innocency and high blood of youth." "Well, sir," said Wolsey, "you may go. Go with him, secretary, and see that he be well tended, but allowed to have speech of no one." The priest and the secretary withdrew in silence, and no sooner were they gone than, abandoning his kingly dignity, Henry started from his seat and strode up and down the room in one of those fits of passion which, even then, would sometimes take possession of him. At length, stopping opposite Wolsey, who stood up the moment the king rose, he struck the table with his clenched hand. "He shall die!" cried he. "By heaven, he shall die! Let him be attached, my Wolsey." "My sergeant-at-arms is with me, your grace," replied the cardinal, "and shall instantly execute your royal will. Better arrest him directly, lest he fear and take flight." "Whom do you mean?" cried the king. "Ha! I say attach Edward Bohun, Duke of Buckingham." "In regard to the Duke of Buckingham, my liege," replied Wolsey, less readily than he had spoken before, "will you take into your royal consideration whether it may not be better to suffer him to proceed a while with his treasonous schemes? For I question if the evidence we have at present against him would condemn him with the peers." "But he is a traitor," cried Henry, "an evident traitor, and, by my faith, shall suffer a traitor's death." "Most assuredly he is a black and heinous traitor," answered Wolsey; "and yet your grace will think what a triumph it would be for him if his peers should pronounce him innocent. He has store of friends among them. Far better let him proceed yet a while, and, with our eyes upon him, watch every turn of his dark plot, and seize him in the midst, when we shall have such proof that even his kindred must, for very shame, pronounce his guilt. In the meantime, I will ensure that he be so strictly guarded that he shall have power to do no evil." "You are right, my Wolsey, you are right," cried the king, seating himself, and laying his hand upon the papers. "Let it be conducted as you say, but see that he escape not, for his ingratitude adds another shade to what is black itself. As to this Sir Osborne Maurice, 'tis a noble spirit perverted by that villain Buckingham. I have seen and watched the seeds of many virtues in him." "It must be painful, then, for your grace to command his arrest," said Wolsey; "and yet he is so near your royal person, and his treason is so manifest, that the very love of your subjects requires that he should suffer death." "And yet," replied Henry, fixing his eyes upon the cardinal, and speaking emphatically, "and yet, even now I feel the warm blood of the English kings flowing lightly in my veins, which but for him would have been cold and motionless. And shall I take his life that has saved mine? No, Wolsey, no, it must not be. He has been misled, but is not wicked." "Still, your grace's justice requires," said Wolsey, "pardon my boldness, that he should undergo his trial, then, if condemned, comes in your royal mercy to save him, saying to him, you are judged for having been a traitor, you are pardoned for having saved your king." "But be assured, my Wolsey," replied Henry, "that if his trial were to take place now, the great traitor Buckingham will take alarm, and either endeavour to do away all evidence of his treason, or take to flight and shelter himself from justice." "No need that his trial be immediate," answered the cardinal. "If your grace permits, he shall be committed privately to the Tower, and there await your return from France, by which time, depend on it, the Duke of Buckingham will have given further tokens of his mad ambition, and both may be tried together. Then let the greater traitor suffer and the lesser find grace, so that your royal justice and your clemency be equally conspicuous." "Be it so, then," said the king; "though, in truth, good cardinal, it grieves me to lose this youth. He is, without exception, the best lance in Christendom, and would have done our realm much credit in our journey to France. I say it grieves me; ay, heartily it grieves me." "Nay, your grace," said Wolsey, "you will doubtless find 1,000 as good as he." "Not so, not so, Lord Cardinal," cried Henry. "These are things not so easily acquired as you churchmen think. I never saw a better knight. When his lance breaks in full course, you shall behold his hand as steady as if he held a straw. Nor knee, nor thigh, nor heel shall shake; and when the toughest ash splinters upon his casque, he shall not bend even so much as a strong oak before a summer breeze. But his guilt is clear, so the rest is all naught." "Then I have your grace's command," said Wolsey, "to commit him to the Tower. He shall be attached directly by the sergeant at arms, and sent down by the turn of the tide." "Hold, hold!" cried the king. "Not to night, good Wolsey. Before we fly our hawk we cry the heron up, and he shall have the same grace. To morrow, if he be still found, arrest him where you will; but for to night he is safe, nor must his path be dogged. He shall have free and fair start, mark me, till to morrow at noon. Then slip your greyhounds on him, if you please." "But, your grace," cried Wolsey, "if you let him—" "It is my will," said the king, his brow darkening. "Who shall contradict it? Ha! See that it be obeyed exactly, my lord." "It shall, your grace," said Wolsey, bending his head with a profound inclination. "Your will is law to all your faithful servants; but only let your noble goodness attribute to my deep love for your royal person the fear I have that this traitorous agent of a still greater traitor may be tempted in despair. If he find that he is discovered to attempt some heinous crime against your grace—" "Fear not, man, fear not," replied the king. "He that, when he might have let me die, risked his own life to save mine, will never arm his hand against me. I fear not, cardinal, so be you at ease." But return to London, see that Buckingham be closely watched, and be sure that no preparation be wanting for the meeting with Francis of France. Be liberal, Lord Cardinal. I would not that the nobles of France should say they had more gold than we. Let everything be abundant, be rich, and in its flush of newness. And as to Sir Osborne Maurice, arrest him to-morrow, if he be still here. Let him be fairly tried, and if he come out pure, well. Yet still, if he be condemned, his own life shall be given him as a reward for mine. However, till to-morrow let it rest. It is my will." Though Wolsey would have been better pleased to have had the knight safely in the Tower, yet, even in case of his making his escape before the next morning, his great object was gained, that of banishing from the court for ever one whose rapid progress in the king's regard bade fair, with time, to leave every one behind in favour, and therefore ceased to press the king upon the subject, especially as he saw, by many indubitable signs, that Henry was in one of those imperious moods which would bear no opposition. A few subjects of less import still remained to be discussed, but the monarch bore these so impatiently that Wolsey soon ceased to importune him upon them, and resolving to reserve all further business for some more auspicious day, he rose, and taking leave with one of those refined yet high-coloured compliments which no man was so capable of justly tempering as himself, he left the royal presence, and proceeded to another part of the palace on business whose object is intimately allied to the present history, as we shall see hereafter. End of chapter 24. Chapter 25 of Darnley by G.P.R. James. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 25. And knowing this, should I yet stay, like such as blow away their lives, enamoured of their golden gyves? Ben Jonson. Away, though parting be a fretful corrosive, it is applied to a deathful wound. Shakespeare. Who would be a king if he could help it? When Wolsey had left him, Henry once more raised the papers which lay upon the table, and read them through, then leant his head upon his hand, and passed some moments in deep and frowning meditation. "No," said he, "no, I will not show them to him, lest he warn the traitor Buckingham. Ho, without! Tell Pace to come to me." Then again falling into thought, he remained musing over the papers, with bent brows and an absent air, till the secretary had time to obey his summons. On his approach, the good but timid Pace almost trembled at the angry glow he saw upon the king's face, but he was relieved by Henry placing in his hands the papers which Wolsey had left, bidding him have good care thereof. Pace took the papers in respectful silence, and waited an instant to see whether the king had further commands. But Henry waved his hand, crying, "Begone, leave me, and send me the page." The page lost not a moment in appearing, for the king's hasty mood was easily discernible in his aspect, and no one dared, even by an instant's delay, to add fuel to the fire which was clearly burning in his bosom. But still Henry allowed him to wait for several minutes. "Who waits in the antechamber?" demanded he at length. "Sir Charles Hammond, so please your grace," replied the page. "And where is Denny?" asked the king. "Where is Sir Anthony Denny, huh?" "He has been gone about an hour, your grace," replied the page. "They hold me at naught," cried Henry. "Strike his name from the list. By my life, I will teach him to wait. Go call Sir Osborne Maurice to my presence." And rising from his seat, he began again to pace the apartment. The page, as he conducted the young knight to the hall in which Henry awaited him, took care to hint that he was in a terrific mood, with that sort of eagerness which all vulgar people have to spread evil tidings. The knight, however, asked no question and made no comment, and passing through the door which he had seen give admission to the priest about an hour before, he entered the antechamber, in which was seated Sir Charles Hammond, who saluted him with a silent bow. Proceeding onward, the page threw open the door of the privy chamber, and Sir Osborne approached the king, in the knitting of whose brow, and in the curling of whose lip, might be plainly seen the inward irritation of his impetuous spirit. As he came near, Henry turned round, and fixed his eye upon him; and the knight, not knowing what might be the cause or what the consequence of his anger, bent his knee to the ground, and bowing his head, said, "God save your grace." "Marry, thou sayest well," cried Henry. "We trust he will, and guard us ever against traitors. What say you?" "If ever there be a man so much a traitor to himself," replied Sir Osborne, "as to nourish one thought against so good a king, oh, may his treason fall back upon his own head, and crush him with the weight." "Well prayed again," said Henry, more calmly. "Rise, rise, Sir Osborne. We must speak together. Give me your arm. We cannot sit and speak when the heart is so busy. We will walk. This hall has space enough." And with a hurried pace he took one or two turns in the chamber, fixing his eyes upon the ground, and biting his lip in silence. "Now, by Our Lady," cried he at length, "there are many men in this kingdom, Sir Osborne Maurice, who, seeing us here, holding your arm and walking by your side, would judge our life in peril." Sir Osborne started, and gazed in Henry's face with a look of no small surprise. "Did I but know of any one," said he at length, "who could poison your royal ear with such a tale, were it other than a churchman or a woman, he should either confess his falsehood or die upon my sword. But your grace is noble, and believes them not. However," he continued, unbuckling his sword, and laying it on the table as far away as possible, "on all accounts I will put that by. There lays the sword that was given me by an emperor, and here is the hand that saved a king's life. And here," he continued, kneeling at the king's feet, "is a heart as loyal as any in this realm, ready to shed its best blood if its king command it. But tell me, only tell me, how I have offended." "Rise, sir knight," said the king. "On my life, I believe you so far, that if you have done wrong, you have been misled, and that your heart is loyal, I am sure. Yet listen. You came to this court a stranger. In you I found much of valour and of knightly worth. I loved you, and I favoured you. Yet now I find that you have in much deceived me. Speak not, for I will not see in you any but the man who has saved my life. I will know you for none other. Say then, Sir Osborne, is not life a good return for life? It is, huh?" "It is, my liege," replied Sir Osborne, believing his real name discovered. "Whatever I have done amiss has been but error of judgment, not of heart, and surely cannot be held as very deep offence in eyes so gracious as my noble king's." "We find excuses for you, sir, which rigorous judges might not find," replied the monarch. "Yet there are many who strive to make your faults far blacker than they are, and doubtless may urge much against you. But hitherto we stand between you and the law, giving you life for life. But see you use the time that is allowed you well, for to-morrow at high noon issues the warrant for your apprehension, and if you make not speed to leave this court and country, your fate upon your head, for you have warning." Sir Osborne was struck dumb, and for a moment he gazed upon the king in silent astonishment. "I know not what to think," he cried after a while. "I cannot believe that a king famous for his clemency can see in my very worst crime aught but an error. Your grace has said that many strive to blacken me. Still humbly at your feet let me beseech you to tell me of what they do accuse me." "Of many rank offences, sir," replied the king, somewhat impatiently; "offences of which you might find it hard to wash yourself so clear as not to leave enough to weigh you down. However, 'tis our will that you depart the court, without further sojourn; and if you are wise, you'll speed to leave a country where you may chance to find worse entertainment and a harder lodging if you stay. Go to the keeper of our private purse, who will give 1,000 marks to clear your journey of all cost, and God befriend you for the time to come." "Nay, your grace," replied Sir Osborne, "poor as I came, I'll go, but thus far richer, that for one short month I won a great king's love, and lost it without deserving. And if to this your grace will add the favour to let me once more kiss your royal hand, you'll send me grateful forth." Henry held out his hand towards him. "By my faith," cried he, "I do believe him honest. But the proofs, the proofs! Go, go, Sir Osborne. I judge not harshly of you. You have been misled, but fly speedily, I command you. For your own sake, fly." Sir Osborne raised himself, took his sword from the table, and, with a low obeisance to the king, quitted the room, his heart far too full to speak with any measure what he felt. His hopes all broken, his dreams of happiness dispelled like a wreath of morning mist in the sunshine, the young knight sought his chamber, and casting himself in a seat, leant his head upon his hand, in an attitude of total despondency. He did not think, for the racking images of despair that hurried through his brain were very different from the defined shapes of the most busy thought. His bosom was in chaos of dark and gloomy feelings, and it was long before reason lent him any aid to arrange and disentangle his ideas. As it did so, however, the thought of whither he should fly presented itself, and his first resolution was to go to his father in Wales. But then, to be the bearer of such news, it was more than he could undertake. Besides, as he reflected, he saw that, use what speed he might, his course would be easily tracked in that direction, and that the facilities which the messengers of the government possessed of gaining fresh horses would soon enable them to overtake and arrest him if the warrant were issued the next day at noon, as the king had said, and followed up with any degree of alacrity. That it would be so he had no reason to doubt, attributing, as he did, the whole of his misfortune to the hatred and jealousy of Wolsey, whose haste to ruin him had been sufficiently evinced by his having begun and completed it within one day after his arrival from York. These thoughts brought on others, and not knowing the stinging impulse of a favourite's jealousy, he pondered over the malice of the cardinal, wondering whether in former days his father might have offered the then rising minister either offence or injury, and thus entailed his evil offices on himself and family. But still the question, whither he should fly, returned, and after much consideration he resolved that it should be to Flanders, once more to try the fortune of his sword; for though peace nominally subsisted between the French king and the new emperor, it was a peace which could be but of short duration, and it was even then interrupted by continual incursions upon each other's territories, and incessant violation of the frontier by the various garrisons of France and Burgundy. Once arrived, he would write, he thought, to his father, who would surely join him there, and he would raise their house and name in a foreign land. But Constance de Grey, could she ever be his? He knew not, but at her very name hope relighted her torch, and he began to dream again. As he thought thus, he raised his eyes and perceived his faithful attendant Longpole watching him with a look of anxious expectation, waiting till his agitated reverie should end. "How, Longpole?" said he. "You here? I did not hear you come in." "I have been here all the time, your worship," replied the yeoman, "and I've made some noise in the world, too, while you have been here, for I let all the armour fall in that closet." "I did not hear you," said the knight. "My thoughts were very busy. But, my good Heartley, I am afraid the time is come that we must part." "By my faith, it must be a queer time, then, your worship," answered Longpole, "for it is not everyday weather that will make me quit you, especially when I see you in such a way as you were just now." "But, my good Longpole," answered the knight, "I am ruined. The king has discovered who I really am. Wolsey has whetted his anger against me, and he has banished me his court, bidding me fly instantly, lest I be to-morrow arrested, and perhaps committed to the Tower. I must therefore quit this country without loss of time, and take my way to Flanders, for my hopes here are all at an end. Wolsey is too powerful to be opposed." "Well then, my lord," said Longpole, "I will call you by your real name now, and so I'll go and saddle our horses, pack up as much as I can, and will be off in a minute." "But, my good Longpole," said his master, "you do not think what you are doing. Indeed, you must not leave your country and your friends, and that poor girl Geraldine, to follow a man ruined in fortune and expectations, going to travel through strange lands, where he knows not whether he may find friends or enemies." "More reason he should have a companion on the road," replied Longpole. "But, my lord, my determination is made. Where you go, there I will go too. And as to little Miss Geraldine, why, when we've made a fortune, which I am sure we shall do, I'll make her trot over after me. But as I suppose there is but little time to spare, I will go get everything into order as fast as possible. Carpe diem, as good Dr. Wilbraham used to say to me when I was lazy. There is your lordship's harness. If you can manage to pop on the breast and back pieces, I will be back directly." "Nay," said the knight, "there is yet one person I must see. However, be not long, good fellow, for I shall not stay. Give me that wrapping cloak with the hood." Longpole obeyed, and enveloping himself in a large mantle, which he had upon a former occasion used to cover his armour, in one of those fanciful justs where every one appeared disguised, the knight left his own apartments and proceeded to those of Lady Constance de Grey. Many were the sounds of mirth and merriment which met his ears as he passed by the various ranges of apartments, jarring harshly with all his own sorrowful feelings; and in the despondency of his mind he marvelled that any but idiots or madmen could indulge in laughter in a world so full of care. Hurrying on to avoid such inharmonious tones, he approached the suite of rooms appropriated to Lady Constance, and was surprised at finding the door open. Entering, nothing but confusion seemed to reign in the antechamber, where her maids were usually found employed in various works. Here stood a frame for caul work, there one for embroidery, here a cushion for Italian lace thrown upon the ground, there a chair overturned, while two of the maids stood looking out of the window, to make use of the homely term, crying their eyes out. "Where is your mistress?" demanded Sir Osborne as he entered. The agitation of his own feelings, and the alarm he conceived from the strange disarray of the apartment, making him stint his form of speech to the fewest words possible. "We do not know, sir," replied one of the desolate damsels. "All we know is, that she is gone." "Gone!" said Sir Osborne. "Gone! In the name of heaven, whither is she gone? Who is gone with her?" "Jesu Maria, sir! Don't look so wild," cried the woman, who thought herself quite pretty enough, even in her tears, to be a little familiar. "Dr. Wilbraham is with the Lady Constance, and so is Mistress Margaret, and therefore she is safe enough, surely." "But cannot you say whither she is gone?" cried the knight. "When did she go? How?" "She went but now, sir," replied the woman. "She was sent for about an hour or more ago to the little tapestry hall, to speak with my lord cardinal, and after that she came back very grave and serious, and made Mistress Margaret pack up a great parcel of things, while she herself spoke with Dr. Wilbraham. And when that was done, they all three went away together; but before she went she gave each of us 50 marks apiece, and said that she would give us news of her." "Did she not drop any word in regard to her destination?" demanded Sir Osborne. "Anything that might lead you to imagine whither she has gone?" "Mistress Margaret said they were going to London," said the other girl, turning round from the window and speaking through her tears. "She said that they were going because such was my lord cardinal's will; but I don't believe it, for she said it like a lie, and I'm sure I shall never see my young lady again. I'm sure I shan't. So now, sir knight, go away and leave us, for we can tell you nothing more." The knight turned away. "Oh, Constance, Constance!" thought he, as he paced back to his apartments, "will you ever be able to resist all the influence they may bring against you? When you hear, too, of your lover's disgrace? Well, God is good, and sometimes joy shines forth out of sorrow. like the sun that dispels the storm. As he thought thus, the prediction of Sir Cesar, that their misfortune should be but of short duration, came across his mind. The evil part of his prophecy, thought he, is already on my head. Why should I doubt the good? Come, I will be superstitious and believe it fully, for hope is surely as much better than fear, as joy is better than sorrow. Will Constance ever give her hand to another? Oh, no, no, and surely, surely I shall win her yet. Of all the bright gifts with which heaven has blessed our youth, there is none more excellent than the elasticity of spirit which rebounds strongly from the depressing load of a world's care, and after the heaviest weight of sorrow, or the severest stroke of disappointment, raises us lightly up, and gives us back to hope and to enjoyment. It is peculiar to youth, and it is peculiar to good conduct, for the reiterated burdens that years cast upon us as they fly gradually rob the spring of expectation of its flexibility, and vice feels within itself that it has not the same right to hope as virtue. Sir Osborne's spirit was all rebound, and though surrounded with doubts, with difficulties, and with dangers, it was not long before he was ready to try again the wide adventurous world with unabated vigour of endeavour, though rebuffed in his first endeavours and disappointed in his brightest expectations. On returning to his apartment, he found his faithful attendant ready prepared, and there was a sort of easy, careless confidence in the honest yeoman's manner, that well seconded the efforts of reviving hope in his master's breast. It seemed as if he never thought for a moment that want of success was possible, and besides, he was one of those over whom fortune has little power. He himself had no extraneous wants or wishes. Happy by temperament, and independent by bodily vigour, he derived from nature all that neither Stoic nor Epicurean could obtain by art. He was a philosopher by frame, and more than a philosopher, as his word is generally used, for he had a warm heart and a generous spirit, and joined affection for others to carelessness about himself. Such was the companion of all others fitted to cheer Sir Osborne on his way, far more so than if he had been one of equal rank or equal refinement, for he was always ready to assist, to serve, to amuse, or advise, without sufficient appreciation of finer feelings to encourage, even by understanding them, those thoughts upon which the knight might have dwelt painfully in conversation with any one else. At the same time, Longpole was far above his class in every respect. He had some smattering of classical knowledge, which was all that rested with him of the laborious teaching which good Dr. Wilbraham had bestowed upon his youth. He not only could read and write, but had read all the books he could get at, while a prisoner in France, and had, on more than one occasion, contrived to turn a stanza, though neither the stuff nor the workmanship was very good; and he had, moreover, a strange turn for jesting, which he took care to keep in perpetual exercise. To these he joined all the thousand little serviceable qualifications of an old soldier, and an extraordinary fluency in speaking French, which had proved very useful to him in many instances. Thus equipped inwardly, he now stood before Sir Osborne, with his outward man armed in the plain harness of a custrel or shield-bearer, with casque and corselet, cuissards, brassards, and gauntlets; and considering that he was nearly 6 feet 3 inches in height, he was the sort of man that a knight might not be sorry to see at his back in the mêlée or the skirmish. "Longpole," said the knight, "give me my armour. I will put it on while you place what clothes you can in the large horse-bags. But, my good custrel, we must put something over our harness. Give me that surcoat. You have not barded my horse, I trust?" "Indeed I have, my lord," replied he, "and, depend on it, you may have need thereof. Remember how dear the barding of a horse is. I speak of the steel, which is, in fact, the true bard, or bardo, as the Italians call it, for the cloth that covers it is not the bard, and if you carry the steel with you, you may as well have the silk too." "But 'twill weary the horse," said Osborne. "However, as 'tis on, let it stay. only it may attract attention, and give too good a track to any that follow, though, God knows, I can hardly determine which way to turn my rein." To London, to be sure, your worship," cried Longpole. "That is the high road to every part on the earth, and of the earth, and under the earth. If a man want to go to heaven, he will there find guides. If he seek hell, he will find plenty going the same road; and if he love this world better, there shall he meet conveyance to every part of it. What would you think of just paying a visit to good Master William Hance, the merchant, to see if he cannot give us a cast over to Flanders? 1,000 to 1 he has some vessel going, or knows some one that has." "Well bethought," answered Sir Osborne, slowly buckling on his armour. "It will soon grow dusk, and then our arms will call no attention. My hands refuse to help me on with my harness. I am very slow. Nay, good Longpole, if you have already finished, take 100 marks out of that bag, which will nearly empty it, and seek the 3 men the Duke of Buckingham gave me. Divide it between them for their service, and, good Longpole, when you have done that, make inquiries about the palace as to what road was taken by Lady Constance de Grey and Dr. Wilbraham. Do not mention the lady, name only Dr. Wilbraham, as if I sought to speak with him." Longpole obeyed, and after about half an hour's absence returned, tolerably successful in his inquiries; but, much to his surprise and disappointment, he found his young lord very nearly in the same situation in which he had left him, sitting in his chair, half armed, with his casque upon his knee, his fine head bare, and his eye fixed upon the fading gleams of the evening sky, where some faint clouds just above the distant trees seemed as if lingering in the beams of the sun's bright eye, like man still tenacious of the last ray of hope. "Well, Longpole," cried he, waking from his reverie, "what news? Have you heard anything of Lady Constance?" And, as if ashamed of his delay, he busied himself to finish the arrangement of his armour. "Let me aid you, my lord," said Longpole, kneeling down, and soon completing, piece by piece, what his master had left unfinished, replying at the same time to his question. "I have spoken with the man who carried the baggage down to the boat, my lord, and he says that Dr. Wilbraham, Lady Constance, and one of her women, took water about half an hour after the lord cardinal, and seemed to follow his barge." Sir Osborne fell into another reverie, from which at last he roused himself with a sigh. "Well, I can do nothing," said he. "Like an angry child, I might rage and struggle, but I could do no more. Were I to stay, 'twould but be committing me to the Tower, and then I must be still perforce—" Longpole heard all this with an air of great edification; but when he thought that his master had indulged himself enough, he ventured to interrupt him by saying, "The sun, sir, has gone to bed. Had we not better take advantage of his absence, and make our way to London? Remember, sir, he is an early riser at this time of year, and will be up looking after us to morrow, before we are well aware." "Ay, Longpole, ay," replied the knight. "I will linger no longer, for it is unavailing. The trumpet must have sounded to supper by this time, has it not? So we shall have no idlers to gaze at our departure." "The trumpet sounded as I went down but now," said Longpole, "and I met the sewer carrying in a brawn's head, so like his own that I could not help thinking he had killed and cooked his brother. They must be hard at his grace's liege capons even now." "Well, I am ready," said the knight. "Give me the surcoat of tawny velvet. Now, no more feathers," he continued, plucking from his casque the long plume that, issuing from the crest in graceful sweeps, fell back almost to his girdle, taking care, however, at the same time, to leave behind a small white glove wrought with gold, that had surrounded the insertion of the feather, and which he secured in its place with particular attention. "Some one will have rare pillage of this apartment," he added, looking round. "That suit of black armour is worth 500 marks; but it matters not to think of it. We cannot carry them with us. The long sword and baldric, Longpole, and the gold spurs. I will go as a knight at least. Now take the bags. I follow. Farewell, King Henry. You have lost a faithful subject." Thus saying, he proceeded down the stairs after Longpole, and following a corridor, passed by one of the small doors of the great hall, through the partial opening of which were to be heard the rattle and the clatter of plates, of dishes, and of knives, and the buzz of many busy jaws. A feeling of disgust came over Sir Osborne as he heard it, he scarce knew why, and stayed not to inquire, but striding on, came speedily to the stable yard, and was crossing towards the building in which his horses stood, when he observed a man loitering near the door of the stable, whom he soon discovered to be one of the yeomen given him by the Duke of Buckingham. "On, Longpole!" cried the knight, "on, and send him upon some errand, for I am in no fit mood to speak with him now." While Sir Osborne drew back into the doorway, Longpole advanced, and in a moment after the man was seen traversing the court in another direction. The knight then proceeded, the horses were brought forth, and springing into the saddle, Sir Osborne, with a sigh given to the recollection of lost hopes, touched his charger with the spur, and rode out of the gates. Longpole followed, and in a few minutes they were on the high road to London. Chapter 25